All right. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. Excellent. Kind of bookending the day here with that. Way to keep the energy going. Thanks for being with us. I think, he's the sort of face of the event. He's walking out of the room right now. But I'm not sure. He's quite humble. He doesn't take enough credit, so I was hoping we could all give a round of applause to Brian Johnson for putting together this fabulous event here. All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here with us today. Before we jump into your work at Intuitive Surgical, I want to take it back a little bit. Before Intuitive Surgical, you were training as a surgeon.
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in pursuing surgery and what that process is like?
Well, I actually went to medical school expecting to be a primary care physician, taking care of inner city patients who had problems with access to medical care. And what I found actually was I was not patient enough to be a good primary care physician. That if a patient came in to me and said, "Oh, I'm short of breath," I was going to say, "Well, lose some weight and stop smoking," instead of really understanding what the issues were and helping them. But compared to the surgeons that I trained with, I was really patient. And I liked the immediate gratification. I liked the hands-on part of it. And so I did a general surgery residency. And I did that at the time that laparoscopy came out. So I hadn't learned that in my residency program. I was working for the Indian Health Service at the time. And so I went back and I did a fellowship in order to learn laparoscopic surgery. And that's where my clinical career has been. I ended up at Stanford on faculty there and was running the bariatric surgery program, so doing a lot of laparoscopic surgery on morbidly obese patients, which was very hard for me physically. They're very thick abdominal wall. You're having to really move the instruments against a lot of resistance. And I found that ergonomically it really had a toll on me. I've always been in academic medicine, so I'm always teaching, and learning laparoscopic bariatric surgery is actually really hard because of the suturing you do. And so July was a very difficult time to be a patient or a surgeon at Stanford because you had new trainees coming in. And that was actually how I started using the Da Vinci system in my clinical practice. Both it helped ergonomically because I didn't have all that pressure on me of moving the abdominal wall. But it was also much easier to teach fellows and residents how to suture using the system rather than doing it laparoscopically. And that's how I first started using the system and first got introduced to Intuitive.
Gotcha. So these problems were sort of cropping up in the OR, and you saw this technology as solving some of those problems. At what point, how did you get involved with Intuitive Surgical internally? Did they reach out to you? How did that connection start?
There was a woman by the name of Catherine Moore. I believe she's spoken here before, so you all may have heard of her. She was actually a medical student at Stanford, but was also working for industry, looking for opportunities to create new products, and was in my operating room. We were talking. She had a connection to Intuitive, and she's an engineer. So she and I actually spent some time down at the company developing the procedure, figuring out where the ports should be, what the sequence of the steps, what the instruments were. And then Intuitive was very kind. They actually let me bring my entire operating room staff down there for 2 days of training. So we did it on cadavers and models. So our first time with a patient using the system in bariatric surgery, I had a really well-trained team. And actually our operating times for our very first robotic case were less than what our typical operating times were for a laparoscopic case.
So I think most of us in here are familiar with Intuitive Surgical, maybe familiar with the technology. Surgeons typically are sort of creatures of habit. And I think there's maybe a space where patients are a little bit wary of a surgeon using this robotic device as an extension of themselves in the OR. How do you, at Intuitive, how do you guys think about retraining surgeons who spend sort of years perfecting their procedure? So how do you think about retraining them? And also, what do you tell patients that are sort of wary of this technological development?
So I think, Sarah, you're absolutely right. Surgeons in general are conservative. If you've got a routine that works well and you have good outcomes, nobody's really willing to experiment with that in the hopes of getting better outcomes. And you'll find that many, many surgeons are not early adopters because of that reason. They will wait until the technology has been well developed, others have experienced it, there's data out there before they will give it a try. My own personal experience with patients was when I did my first my first 10 robotic cases, I told them fully, these are my first cases. This is what I've done to train. I brought my OR team down there and told them what I thought they would experience or not experience. And I was actually really surprised. In general, patients' vision of a robot was very positive. Their feeling was that that would only help me. And I didn't really have any pushback. I think sometimes surgeons, when they talk to patients, patients think that the robot is autonomous, and therefore the robot will be doing the surgery. And so it needs to be made very clear that, no, it's a tool, it's an enabling tool, but the surgeon's still in control of making the decisions and actually doing the surgery. And that's where I've seen a little bit of resistance from patients, but generally once they understand that. From a training perspective, I've seen training both from industry and also from someone who trained residents and fellows for a very long time. And it's an interesting difference between the two. The company feels very strongly that training on the technology itself is our responsibility. We know that system best, and we know how to use it safely and effectively. But that's only one piece of what a surgeon needs to learn to be able to use it. So first they need to learn how to do the procedure. So they've done that through residency, and most surgeons are already doing whatever the procedure is, either laparoscopically or open. They then come to the company to get their training on the system. And then you need that piece of training of how do you use that technology in that same procedure. And that's where I think it has to be led by other surgeons. And so whether it's partnering with societies or whether it's partnering with specific expert surgeons in robotic surgery to lead that, we do videos, we do case observations, we do remote mentoring, all kinds of technologies to help enable that piece of it. So it's a continuum, and there's a lot of people involved there. There's a piece that we're responsible for fully, and then there's a piece that we help enable.
What were those first 10 cases like for you?
A little nerve-wracking. To the point you'd made earlier, I was getting very good outcomes with my laparoscopic bariatric surgery, and now I was trying something new. It really helped that the whole team had already been trained, and so I wasn't having to keep track of everybody's responsibilities in the operating room. Everybody could work together as a team. But things went very smoothly, and that helped me feel like, okay, this is the right way to handle it, the right things to do. Let's now explore if we can do a little bigger patients, harder patients, and kind of start adding more complexity to what we were doing.
Is there a space where, or can you ever envision this sort of becoming introduced to training surgeons right in medical school, or do you sort of see that really they need to learn the foundations in medical school and then, cool new technology can come sort of later down the road?
Yeah, I think for medical students, they have such a wide amount of information they have to get from every specialty, right? They have to learn about primary care, internal medicine, pediatrics, OBGYN, surgery, that they might get a little bit of exposure to the technology on their surgery rotation. Maybe they'll sit down or work on the simulator, but they're not going to really use it in medical school or learn about it. It's really once somebody's in their residency that they'll have an opportunity to use it in the operating room. And that's where we've seen really that the teaching that isn't done by us, but is done by academic medical centers, that's where that takes place in residency and fellowship.
When you're training folks, what are some of the sort of common themes that come up? What are the common concerns that they have with the technology?
So one of the things that novice surgeons really worry about is the lack of haptics, so that sense of force feedback, which you have fully in open surgery. You lose some of that when you go to laparoscopic surgery. You're starting to depend more on visual cues, and you lose it completely when you go to robotic-assisted surgery. You're completely dependent on visual cues. We found that the expert surgeons don't worry about that because they've learned how to use the visual cues, and you can actually learn them very quickly. But novice surgeons really worry about that. And then Another big difference is that with the current system, there's 4 arms. So the surgeon is actually controlling the camera, 2 operating arms, and an assistant arm. And again, in laparoscopic surgery, you only have 2 hands here. You're only controlling 2 things, and your assistant is controlling 2 others. So that aspect of how do you swap from camera movement to instrument movement, or from retracting movement to operating instrument movement, it's very new, and it's almost a choreography that the surgeons have to learn, and use the way they interact with and utilize their assistants is different than what they found with laparoscopic or open surgery. So that's all part of the learning continuum.
Yeah, I like the word choreography, because I think in so many ways using these technologies is a bit of an art.
Yes.
And it sounds like with this type of a system that maybe when you look at it, it's a little complex and it's got those 4 arms instead of the 2. It is a bit of an art to put that all together.
Yes.
Are there certain kinds of surgery, inside Intuitive, when you guys are looking at new places to expand into, are there certain kinds of surgery that you think Intuitive's technologies are well suited for? And how do you decide which to pursue or which to sort of stave off for later?
Well, I don't know if any of you have know the company from way back when, but the original operation that we chose to address, or the initial organ system, was actually the heart. We thought that the system, the robotic system, could change an open heart surgery with the big sternotomy to small incisions here, so tremendous value to the patient. What we didn't anticipate was the learning curve associated with converting open cardiac surgery to minimally invasive cardiac surgery, and the very little leeway there was for that learning curve, because you don't want to be on pump for too long. And actually, a surgeon, a urologist, was watching a cardiac surgeon do robotic cardiac surgery, and he thought, you know, I could use this for the prostate, which was really only done open. And so he actually was the one who came to us and said, we think there's value here. So we aimed for the heart and ended up down in the prostate. And occasionally we have found internally procedures where we think there's value, and then our customers have agreed. But often it's driven by the customer themselves, who say, we think there's value in this procedure, and it was a procedure we really hadn't thought about before. So we listen very, very carefully to our customers, and watch what they're doing, and have them come in for labs, and show them our new technology to get ideas from them, so that it's a collaborative development.
So how often is it the case that a provider or a customer of yours comes in and says, you know, I think this could really be applicable in this particular procedure?
It happens all the time. Surgeons think about things we've never even thought about, things that can't be done with current open or minimally invasive techniques, but that they think the robot will enable that. So it is, there's people in the company who take in those kind of calls, and they get 20 or 30 emails or phone calls about that almost every day.
Wow. So there are a number of technological developments, I think, that are really pushing the medical device space forward. You can think like smaller sensors, passive sensors, batteries that have this sort of like extended power. Are there certain technologies that you see really helping to advance the robotic-assisted surgery field?
Yeah, I think the really wonderful thing about the robotic-assisted surgery is we've basically put a computer between the surgeon and the patient, which is going to enable all kinds of things that aren't possible with open or laparoscopic surgery. So one obvious one is vision. So can you use information to see things in other wavelengths that the surgeon can't see with white light? So I do a fair amount of laparoscopic cholecystectomies, and we use white light and cholangiography to visualize the common bile duct. We can now use ICG with special imaging, infrared imaging, to see the bile duct long before we have to put any clips or cut it. So that type of, could you see cancer cells? Could you see nerve cells? Would that help you remove the cancer more fully while still saving the structures that you want to keep? Can you take MRI or CT scan of the patient's pathology and be able to overlay that during the surgery to help guide the surgeon to, again, make sure that all of the tumor is removed and the important structures are left behind? And then I think there's a tremendous amount of data that we can get from the system itself that can be fed back to the surgeon and to the OR team to help them make intraoperative decisions. So I think we're really at the very beginning of that journey in terms of the additional technologies that can be used to give more information to the surgeon and the OR team to help them get even better outcomes.
So when Intuitive first hit with their very first product, it was extremely disruptive to the surgical space. And now you guys are this very well-recognized name. You're sort of a mainstay of the industry. How does going from being a disruptor and sort of this like young company to a mainstay in the industry, how does it change your thinking about where the company is headed in the future?
You know, the being innovative and being a disruptor is really in our DNA. Our leaders in our company, our CEO, our chief operating officer, our chief commercial officer, have been there almost from the beginning. I think they're employees number 7 and 9. And so it's very ingrained in the company, and there's a lot of support for R&D and a lot of support for innovation, and I think we'll always maintain that. We do have to look at the market differently now because of competition. I personally, both as a surgeon and as a CMO, think it's been fantastic that competition has come in. I think it validates the technology, it validates that there is a future in robotic-assisted surgery, and I think it will stimulate all of us to be more innovative and to kind of keep thinking outside the box and seeing how else we can bring value to surgeons. So I think we're keeping track of what competitors are doing. We're continuing to innovate in product, but we're also innovating in terms of what we call the ecosystem, in terms of how can we help train surgeons better? How can we help train OR staff better? How can we use analytics to help our customers better? So it's stimulated us and challenged us to be creative and innovative beyond just the platform and the instruments.
So you just mentioned a number of things that you think will help sort of set you apart from the growing number of competitors in your space. Can you expand a little bit into how you see analytics shaping your business?
So I think there's a role for analytics in various ways. I think we use analytics right now to talk with customers about how to build a very efficient, cost-efficient, and quality-efficient robotics program. We can show them how they're performing compared to their peers, help them identify best practices, and then keep giving them back the information that shows whether they're meeting the standards that they want to meet or not. We can also use that analytics in the operating room, and we can capture movements of the instruments at certain ports of the operation that are different than how an expert would do it. And we can give that information back to the surgeon, or we're exploring how to give that information back to the surgeon to help him or her be as efficient and as safe as possible during that procedure. So we're really investing a lot in exploring how these analytics can be used kind of throughout the continuum of our relationship with customers.
It's so interesting because you're still operating, you're still in the OR every once in a while, and you're helping to guide this company. How has that perspective helped Intuitive sort of stay in touch with what its customers want?
So it's actually very interesting using our technology in our labs as the chief medical officer and then using it as a surgeon in my operating room. I see it differently, and what I want from it or I need from it or what I notice is very different. And so it's actually been very, very helpful for me to understand what our customers need and want, not just from what they say, but from what I experience as a customer. And so I think that's been really valuable to me in terms of giving feedback to our engineers, giving feedback to our marketing people. In my academic career, my focus was really surgical education. I'm passionate about it, and that's how I actually got promoted. And so the ability to now come and work with a global group of people who share that same passion around surgical education and training, where we can try new technologies and novel ways of training and learning out of the operating room, again, is very synergistic with what I do as a teacher at Stanford as well as what I'm trying to do as a chief medical officer at Intuitive.
Yeah, I think sometimes companies have this expectation of how their system will work in the field, and then there's sort of the reality and the real world experience. Yeah. And so, moving into a sort of different topic, but related, I think there's a shift among the industry and also at FDA that we've noticed that they're really interested in companies gathering up real world evidence and also finding out what patients want from the system. How is Intuitive incorporating those practices? And do you see us shifting away from the sort of standard randomized control trial and really, putting our focus on the real world evidence and the patient preference?
Yeah. So I think that transition started several years ago, and actually even in pharma, not just in medical device industry. RCTs are the gold standard, but there are limitations to their generalizability. Right? If you as a doctor, you have a patient that meets those exact inclusion and exclusion criteria, great, you can use those results to help you decide what the treatment should be for your patient. But if you have a patient that doesn't meet those inclusion and exclusion criteria, then that RCT really doesn't help you decide how to treat that patient. And the complexity when you look at a medical device is even more because you have to deal with the equipoise issue and you have to deal with the variability in surgeons' abilities. My ability to do a gallbladder is going to be very different than your ability to do a gallbladder, and therefore whether you should be doing it open laparoscopically or robotic, it'll be different than the decision that I would make. We've actually tried multiple times to have RCTs, to sponsor RCTs, and in our discussion with surgeons over and over and over, surgeons who use the robotic system will not randomize their patients to a laparoscopic or open approach. They think it's an inferior approach. And the surgeons who do laparoscopic or open surgery won't learn robotic surgery to randomize their patients. And so we end up doing registries and cohort studies, which are real-world evidence. So the vast majority of the data on Intuitive, on the Da Vinci products, there's over 12,000 publications now, is real-world evidence. And I was very happy to see that the FDA has come to recognize the value of real-world evidence and how helpful and important it can be. So I think we are seeing that movement, and we as a company have invested very heavily in making sure that there's sufficient real-world evidence for people to make decisions about healthcare decisions.
Are there other sort of regulatory or reimbursement trends that you're keeping a close eye on?
Yes, so one of the trends that we've seen is our system has been used to enable MIS surgery. So procedures that were typically done open are now being able to be done minimally invasively because of the use of the Da Vinci system. And as that has happened, those procedures have migrated to the outpatient realm, which is very positive, but they couldn't be moved beforehand because they were being done open. They couldn't be done minimally invasively. So we've seen that a lot in benign procedures, but we're also starting to see it in cancer operations. So prostatectomy for prostate cancer, or hysterectomy for endometrial cancer, we're starting to see more and more of those being done in an outpatient setting. So that's one migration that we're keeping a very, very close eye on.
So shifting to sort of a different topic, it strikes me as we're sitting here that you are a trained surgeon, which is a very male-dominated industry, and you're also an executive in the medical technology space, which is still fairly male-dominated, I would say. Yesterday, we had a discussion about diversity and inclusion in this industry that we all really love and appreciate. And one of the things that comes up is, women are looking for mentors and people to help elevate them and, share with them the lessons they've learned throughout their path. Can you recall a mentor or somebody that sort of helped advance your career and keep your drive and passion through these two sort of industries?
I agree completely that I think mentorship is really, really critical and important. I would say that I've not had one specific mentor. I've had a series of mentors, and I've learned different things from each of them, both about things I want to do and about ways that I don't want to be. So I've seen, surgeons have had a reputation for a long time of being very impatient and very intolerant and very rude in the operating rooms. And I saw that in my residency program. And I realized that is not how I want to be. But those same surgeons had an unbelievably great relationship with their patients. And so I could say, that's the piece of them that I want mentoring on, because I want to have that kind of relationship with my patients. But that's the piece I don't want mentoring on, because I don't want to be like that. And so what I've personally tried to do is learn a little something from all the people that I interact with, that I say, I really like the way that person does that, the way that person listens, or the way that person responds when somebody disagrees, or the way that person handles that difficult situation. while also realizing there's parts of who they are that I cannot or don't want to be. And then I think the other piece that I've tried to do is to feel free to reach out to people that I've met that I've really admired, and not wait for them to come to me or not wait for a mentoring program to be put into place. That can be very hard to do, but in general I have found that people that I admire are very open and willing to help and mentor and give advice. And when I talk to women residents or young women faculty or young women engineers, I tell them, look for mentors everywhere and reach out and talk to them. You'll find that they're much more responsive than you might think.
Yeah, and can you share, now that you're sort of on the other side of that table, or the other side of that conversation, where you're helping to train folks that want to be surgeons, what other lessons are you trying to impart upon them?
Yeah, so one of the things I think that is really an issue I found both in medicine and in industry is the whole family-work balance. And I don't have any great solutions, but I had 2 chairmen tell me this, and I really took it to heart. So they would put into their schedule their family time and their personal time. So and I still do this. I get my kids' schedule at the beginning of the year, and I block out the days that they don't have school or they only have a half a day of school. And as I get close to that day, I may not be able to keep it free, but I know I won't be able to free it up if I don't put it into my schedule ahead of time. And so whether it's making sure that I'm able to go to do hot lunch on a weekly basis at their school, or whether it's going on a field trip, I make sure I put those things into my schedule, because that's the only way that they will be as important as all the work-related things that I have to do. So, for example, my trip here, I just got back from London Sunday, and then I came here. I go back home tonight, and I took tomorrow morning off to be able to take the kids to school. So it allows me to have that balance and be very deliberate about it. I think that becomes easier as you get further along in your career than when you're first starting. But if you try to do as much of that as you can throughout, I think you're much more likely to be able to get that balance. Not necessarily on a day-to-day or weekly basis, but kind of overall.
So one of the things we had discussed yesterday was that internally inside companies need sort of like actionable things that they can, study or note about themselves. Does Intuitive have any sort of internal commitments to diversity or any programs?
Yeah, so we believe that diversity and inclusion is very important. We actually think we are already a very diverse company, and so it's really more about inclusion. So we do have a program where we are helping, in particular, managers understand what it means to be inclusive, what kind of language to use, how to look for situations where perhaps somebody is not feeling included, how to be able to listen to people who have a different opinion or who have a different perspective or different background. So it's something we realize in this day and age, in order to be successful as a company, you absolutely have to be committed to diversity and inclusion.
So, shifting back to sort of the general field of robotic surgery, what do you see? I know making bold predictions doesn't always work out, but where do you see the field of robotic surgery headed?
I think, again, we are, even though the company's been in place, I guess, for about 23 years, I really think that we're in the infancy of what robotic-assisted surgery can do. As we look to new applications, we look at catheter-based robotics, we look at diagnostic-based robotics, we look outside of the abdomen and pelvis and thorax. I think we'll continue to find procedures where having a computer there, having a robot there will bring value. And so I think, in my lifetime, I've seen 2 revolutions in my surgical lifetime, the laparoscopic revolution and now the robotic revolution. And my guess is in 10 or 15 years from now, it will change yet again as technology continues to evolve. But really, the focus is going to continue to be more minimally invasive. So the more minimally invasive you can get, the better outcomes are for patients and the better their journey is. And so I think that eventually we will move to a place where as many procedures as possible that can be done with the smallest incision or no incision at all will really be the goal for companies.
Do you ever see a scenario in which the surgeon is sort of almost totally removed from the process, or do you always see the system as being a tool that sort of augments their practice?
So I actually think the technology to be able to create an autonomous robot will actually be easy to solve. That I don't think is the problem. I actually think the problem will be the regulatory environment. I mean, to be able to prove that that is safe and effective to the FDA standards is going to be incredibly difficult. And so I think that's where the bottleneck will be for autonomous robots. Whether you'll be able to autonomize portions of it, I think that could come in my lifetime. Well, maybe in your lifetime, but I think that that will happen. But I don't think that's a technology problem. I think that's a regulatory problem.
When you think about the sort of OR of the future, maybe it doesn't involve just purely robots running it and the humans are on the outside looking in, but what does it look like to you?
Yeah. So a lot of data streams in the operating room, ability to see beyond just what can be seen with white light, trackers that are tracking the movements of the OR team to making sure they're being as efficient as possible, technology that allows an anticipation of what's needed next or what's going to be done next. I've actually seen some suggestions that you could replace the scrub tech or the OR nurse with robots. I don't know that we'll ever get to that point, but I think what you'll see is more and more technology that is more and more enabling to allow patients to have the best possible outcomes and the best possible journey.
Do you see I think there's sort of a healthy tension that exists here, and that, the patient, obviously we all want optimal outcomes for the patients, but we also, when we think about patient experience, we don't want the technology to sort of get in the way of the human-to-human interaction. What's the balance like there?
Yeah, and I think that that's where the problem is and where the tension is. And I don't know exactly how we will end up with that. I think, we've already seen changes in that, and I think it'll continue to evolve. And I'm curious to see where it ends up.
Dr. Curet, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Let's hear it for Dr. Curet.
Thank you.